So there are many privileges as to being a speaker at TEDx, and one of them is that they have a dinner the night before. And the people were quite pleasant last night. In fact, they were really terrific, but I don't see the two in the audience who seemed a little aggressive towards me. And one of them said, what are you going to talk about tomorrow? And I don't know, I reacted by saying I haven't thought about it yet. And then I said, actually, I'm going to talk about snoring and dirty hands. And they said, oh dear, that doesn't sound very interesting to come all that way for that. So let me explain to you why I'm going to talk about snoring and dirty hands. There are two examples of topics that are particularly not very sexy, really, not very TED-like, but actually they do threaten your dreams and my dreams of having a sustained, long and happy life. They're also topics that we love tackling in our labs at Toronto Rehab because they're practical things, like the toilets and things that she mentioned, that you can solve, or you can take a long step forward in solving them with technology. So they're real threats, and they're important threats, and they're threats that you should not ignore. Now, there's been a lot of talk about dreams. So let's talk about dreams. Let's talk about sleep. And sleep, as you know, is really important, both for your physical and your cognitive health. But there's a big threat lurking. I guess there are some ladies here who've slept with men at times. I don't know. But they've probably encountered a man during the night who does something like this. Indeed. Indeed, even over here you see my patient Johan, who, by the way, I had to rent from a Dutch hospital for 10 euros. And they assured me that he had bilateral compound fractures of the leg, which I wonder, having seen him jump up on the bed, but they've also told me he has a problem with snoring. So actually, there's one colleague of mine who we measured recently stopped breathing on average 86 times an hour during the night for more than 10 seconds. And that would be regarded as a severe case of obstructive sleep apnea. If you add that up, that's more than 15 minutes in an hour that you're not breathing. So it's not surprising that the consequences are more than just being sleepy. They're also significant cardiovascular consequences, and this is why you need to be interested. Now, it always used to be taught that the problem was with obese people, that they had fat around the neck, and when you were sleeping, somehow the fat pad would press on your throat and obstruct the flow of air. But that is not really what we're seeing, because we're seeing a lot of quite thin people who have sleep apnea as well. And what's happening is that during the day we're sitting, particularly men, as you'll get to see in a minute, are sitting, and during the day fluid begins to accumulate in our legs. Our ankles swell. And yes, indeed. And Doctors Bradley and Udoli at our institute have developed a new theory. And what happens in that theory is that when people lie down at night, that fluid starts to flow back up. And you'll see the ankles shrink, and you'll see the neck swell, particularly in men. In women, the baby-making parts seem to stop that happening as much. So they benefit by not having as much sleep apnea, but of course they're disturbed by the loud snoring of their male partners. Now, I'm going to take a bit of a chance here. I'm going to ask the audience to raise your hand high and clearly and keep it up if you've been diagnosed with sleep apnea. Would you do that for me? Oh, I hope some have. Come on. Well, there are a few. There ought to be about 8% of the population. So you're either very shy or there are some. Okay. So now, the problem is that only between 5 and 15% of people who have it know they have it. So now, with the person's hand still raised, I want the 4 people on each side of that person to raise their hands as well. it looks a bit more impressive. Okay, as you look around. All right. So, what matters is that sleep apnea affects 8% of the adult population, and you can compare this with diabetes, which affects about 3 or 4%. It's eminently treatable, and if you have it, you need to know that you've got it, and you need to treat it, because as a result of it, you have 3 times the chance of having a stroke, 3 times, 4 times the chance of having a heart attack. You have a higher chance of having cancer, and there's some debate now, but you may have a chance between 2 and 30 times, depending on the severity of the sleep apnea, of being a driver involved in a serious road accident. So you see that this is a huge public health problem, and to my colleagues at dinner last night, that's my justification for talking about it. Here's why it's a hidden problem. If you want to be diagnosed, you have to be admitted to a sleep clinic, and you have lots of wires and electrodes put on you, and then you're told to go to sleep. Well, not many people want to go to a sleep clinic. It takes a referral in most healthcare systems. In my country, in Canada, in some provinces, you can have to wait up to 2 years to get admitted to a sleep clinic, and it costs a lot of money. So here's the TED bit. We decided that we needed to develop a reliable testing method that could be used at home without a technician supporting it, and that was essentially disposable in cost. So around the world, we could begin at least, first of all, to identify it, and then treat it, and then avoid these huge, huge healthcare costs. Now, Doctors Alsher, Levchenko, and Pong did it, and Johan is wearing one here. Johan, be careful, you mustn't move your leg. Yes, so what it is a very simple plastic device that anyone can afford. In fact, they're really cheap. And he sleeps with it overnight, and there's a little SD card here that records the sound very precisely of his breathing and of the air moving across the mask. Now, this recording is then analyzed automatically by a computer. If the score is less than 10, most sleep physicians would agree that you have no problem. If it's more than 10, then we can decide whether, with answering a few questions, whether you have sleep apnea or not, and then treat it. The correlation is better than 95% with those complex sleep clinics that you just saw, but moreover, you can now do it on many, many nights, and you can see if losing weight, for example, solves the problem, or lying on your side instead of your back. Now, here's my second example of a major threat to the 7, 8, or 9 billion, whichever speaker you believe. And let's just pop this away. And you might be quite surprised that this quail is such a threat. It doesn't look as though it has a very big beak. It doesn't look as though it's going to chomp your leg off. It doesn't look as though it's going to be amongst Hitchcock's birds that are going to attack you. But what it does, it's a sort of theatrical way of representing to you a concern about the development of microorganisms that are more resistant to treatment and that are threatening us all quite significantly. Now, back in 1847, there was an obstetric clinic. Actually, there were 2 obstetric clinics in Vienna, in the same hospital. And one was run by doctors, and one was run by midwives. Now, the unfortunate thing is that the clinic run by the doctors was having a mortality rate which, depending on where you read, was up to as much as 30%. The one that was run by the midwives was a few percent, 1, 2, 3, 4%. So the women in Vienna were pleading to be admitted to the midwife clinic, and they alternately, on alternate days, admitted to these 2 clinics. And there was a Dr. Semmelweis who thought there must be something different between the doctors and the midwives. And he realized that the doctors were doing autopsies in the next room, essentially, and they were moving from examining why the women had died to caring for the women. And this was before Pasteur had come across the bug idea. So he introduced washing with a bleach kind of solution, and when he got the doctors to wash with that solution, the mortality actually a few months later dropped to zero. The infection rate still came up a bit because the doctors didn't really like it. They didn't really believe it. They didn't think there was any evidence, and it interfered with their status because they thought going around with messy hands and things was a status symbol. And in fact, he was admitted to an asylum and some 14 days died as a result of beating by the guards. So I'm hoping that this isn't going to happen here today. But what has happened is not a lot. I mean, we don't have as many people die because we can treat the infections, but 1 in 10 people in the Western healthcare system, generally, going into a hospital, come out with something that they didn't have when they went in, or catch something they didn't have when they went in. In North America, that amounts to 100,000 deaths a year. And it's thought 50% of these might be from inadequate hand washing. So that's 1,000 deaths a week in North America alone. That's 2 fully loaded jumbo jets crashing and killing everyone every week. This, by the way, is a cargo jet, but that's all I could find, and it serves for the purpose. It would be a lot more cargo jets, because there's not many people in cargo jets, but we won't go and do that. But what we will do for dramatic effect is imagine the public interest if there were 60 crashes per week around the world, because that's what it amounts to, at least around the world. And we can guess that there'll be significant research money made available to solve this problem quickly, even though it's not a typical sexy TEDx problem. So I've been worried about this for a long time. I've been worried about the increase in antibiotic-resistant drugs, and I've been frustrated that we can't seem to get better hand hygiene. All the efforts, publicity campaigns, enforcement campaigns, they just have failed. You get some improvement for a while, and then it drops right off. So we actually discovered it was a pretty difficult problem. If you follow a busy caregiver around and they're obeying all the rules of washing their hands before they touch a patient and after they leave a patient environment and a couple of other times, they have to do it about 100 times a shift. 100 times a shift. So imagine, fortunately there's alcohol gel. You don't have to use soap and water all the time. But imagine doing that. That would take you maybe 30 seconds by the time you get it and you rub it on your hands. You've got about an hour of your 8-hour shift doing nothing but rubbing yourself with alcohol gel. And by the way, gloves are not an alternative, so do not be kidded. If you're ever in an institution and someone comes up to you and put gloves on, have the strength of character to ask if they washed their hands. Gloves are not the protection that you need. So it's not an easy task. Pressures cause you to forget it. The rules of hand hygiene are not always easy. You go up to a bed and you find that the patient has fouled the bed, and you take the dirty sheets and you're supposed to wash your hands as you go out. You put them on the floor, wash your hands and pick them up and go out. Some hospitals in the US have gone so far now, and it's becoming quite popular, to actually have people in low-wage countries watch closed-circuit televisions watching washing stations for nursing staff so they can prove against liability suits that their staff are hand-washing. Can you imagine the tone that sets up? So you guessed it, we set about developing another little inexpensive plastic device to solve the problem, and we've actually demonstrated that it more than doubles hand hygiene, and it's sustainable for a year. That's as far as we've gone so far. I have no reason to believe it's not sustainable in the long term. Drs. Levchenko and Boskar worked with me on this, and I'm going to try and demonstrate this to you, and we'll do this with Johan's help. We're going to go over here, and we're going to come back through the door into Johan's room. Oh, Doesn't that happen on these occasions? Let me try again. Here we are. Oh, there we are. Temporary setups. But what's happening, if you can listen to it, is my badge is vibrating. And my badge is vibrating to discreetly remind me that I ought to wash my hands. It's not meant to embarrass me. So I'll go over here and I will wash my hands, and you will see that Johan is happy because he's involved in the process. He can also see that I've now washed my hands because my badge is glowing green. Green, TED again. So this is, I can touch Johan, he's quite safe, he will not die. So this is a positive help. It's a reminder, it's not a policeman, although of course it does contain all the information. It knows which room I went into, it knows what time, it knows I was lazy enough that I didn't wash my hands, it knows that I needed to be reminded to do it, and that I did it. So it does it because it has a little eye in the top that looks up at infrared signals on the ceiling. And it's very inexpensive. All the intelligence is in it. You do not have to have a vast network around the institution. You just wear the badge, and you can have a few badges or 1,000 badges. It's not a big deal. If one of the neat things is, if the doctor comes up to you as a patient, and you can turn to him and you can say, "Excuse me, doctor, but your badge isn't glowing green." And he'll say, oh dear, these things often don't work, and he will go off and wash his hands and come back green. So there's no loss of face. Now, old age then should really be a stage in life that we look forward to. I think we all do. You amass toys during your life. The more toys you have when you die, the greater the winner you are. But you amass toys, you amass experience, and now is the time that you should really be contributing back to society, and you should be enjoying life. But it isn't always the case. So in our institute, we focus on the vast opportunities that exist to solve problems like this, that are actually big problems, to solve them in simple ways, affordable ways, to help people enjoy the rest of their lives and help their families look after them. That's what motivates me, and thank you for letting me share it with you.
Thank you, Geoff. Geoff Fernie, ladies and gentlemen.